Chapter 6. You focus on symptoms, not causes. People think that they're creatures of comfort. They convince themselves that what they want is to feel safe and take the easy option. They're 9-to-5 people who tell themselves that they're happy spending 8 hours a day in the same office with the same people, then coming home to eat the same meal before watching the same show on TV. They wake up the next morning and the whole process begins again. It's a good life. It's what society tells them is the right life. They're doing everything that's been asked of them. They're meeting other people's expectations. And there are many who genuinely need that sort of grinding routine who actually thrive on it. I'm the complete opposite of that. I want complete, unanswerable freedom. I want to do what I want to do, when I want to do it, how I want to do it. I want to be a slave to nobody and nothing. I don't want to feel like I need to apologise to anyone for anything. I'm not there yet, but that's what I'm working towards. When I get too comfortable, I feel myself falling away. I'm not a normal person. I follow my standards. I'm wired differently. I'm sporadic. I don't fit into that 9-to-5 world because I'm so energetic and active. Here's the thing. I don't think that I'm alone in being like this. I believe that the world is full of people who have the same instincts and energy as me. But the difference is that they feel compelled to follow other people's expectations. Along the way, their own ambitions and aspirations get squashed. It starts early. I was lucky that when I was a boy, I could let all my energy out. But I don't know how many kids these days have the same chance. Things are so controlled and restrictive. They certainly don't have the freedom I had. They're being pushed into tests and exams from the age of 4. They're told who and what they are, and what box they need to fit themselves into. And the moment they're not in the box, the moment they're not accountable to society, people get very uneasy. That's why people seek solace in what I call synthetic highs. They're not living the life they want, but at the same time, they see no way they can start to lead a different existence. They settle for a decent job with a decent house and stop asking for any better. Along the way, they suppress their capabilities and their need for more. They're in a cage. Maybe they fight against it for a bit, and yet after a while, they forget that the bars are even there. Drinking, partying, drugs, one-night stands, all offer them a release. It's wild behaviour that's by and large tolerated by society because ultimately it helps keep people in their place. They chase these synthetic highs because they don't believe they can get them naturally from their day-to-day existence. I used to get my highs through drinking and fighting because everything else in my life seemed to lack meaning. That was true even when I was in a special military unit, when I'd reached the absolute pinnacle of my trade. When I was doing the most exhilarating, significant job there is. If I wasn't training or fighting, I'd go fucking rogue. Between tours, there would always be a bit of downtime. Some of the lads would go out surfing or climbing, while me and a couple of the others went on the piss all the time. Bar, club, go again. That was my headspace at the time, even though I was getting natural highs from the combat simulation. At the time, I couldn't differentiate between the two. A high was a high, but it was only when I left that the drinking and fighting spiraled out of control. I needed the adrenaline those things gave me, the buzz of getting into a scrap and having no idea whether I'd come out on top. I remember that I used to say to people, "Oh, I'm due a good row." Now, I'd never go after a problem. But when it came, you'd better believe I embraced it. Whatever the rest of the world might think about me, I'm not a violent person. And the thing I hated most about this life I was leading was the aftermath of the fights I got into. Fuck, I've broken that guy's jaw. Fuck, look at his face. I'd find myself disturbed by the horror of what I was capable of, which was ultimately the horror of who I was. I was never bothered by the prospect of being in trouble with the police. I could take a charge or a night in the cells without blinking. What I found hard to live with was the knowledge of the damage I'd caused. Still, I was trapped in a cycle that saw me make the same mistakes over and again. We need that rush of adrenaline because it's our natural instinct to be like that. If you capture a lion and then raise its cubs in captivity, feeding them by hand, surrounding them with human beings, why do you still keep those cubs in a cage? Because lions know nothing else but their instincts. You're guarding against that one time, that one single time, because their inner nature is always there. Human beings are the same, every single one of us. We all have a beast inside us, and we all need a release valve. Our natural instinct is to deal with stuff in the easiest way possible. We feel depressed, so we go out and drink rather than try to tackle the cause of that depression. It's easier to go to the pub and get wrecked than it is to face up to your deep-seated problems. Synthetic highs, however, can only ever act as a sticking plaster. They can make you feel better for a few hours, maybe a whole night, but once they wear off, you'll find yourself hungover, or with a bruise over your eye and a belly full of regrets. A synthetic high is never going to be progressive. It saps your time, money, and energy and leaves you with nothing. It's much better to find other, less destructive ways of venting than pent-up frustration. There are still times when I get a surge of that feeling that once upon a time made me think to myself, oh, I'm due a good row. But now, instead of putting myself in the sort of situation that might lead to a vicious tear-up in a nightclub car park, I go out on a track and push my car as fast as I can. I come home and almost the first thing that Emily notices is the way that my hands are shaking from the adrenaline that's still coursing through my veins. I also go climbing or mountaineering. What excites me about this are the questions you have to ask yourself over and over again. What if I fall here? What if I take the wrong step? I love the frightening thrill that comes with looking at your equipment and asking yourself, is this enough? I live off that buzz. There's nothing more exciting than being on a rock face. Your life is in your hands. These might not be practical responses for you. It's possible that they might be the last thing you'd ever consider doing. But that doesn't mean you can't find your own equivalent. Look for something that forces your body and mind out of their normal sedate rhythms. I know that exercise, it could be a weekly game of five-a-side, or just a run you grab during your lunch break, works for lots of people. It can be a really effective way of expelling the rage and resentment that tends to build up in all of us. The leaking boat. There is, of course, a further step you can take. Whether you're chasing synthetic highs or have progressed to their more natural equivalents, you're still basically just treating the symptoms of the problem, not its causes. You're giving that lion cub a toy to play with, or a bigger space in which to pace up and down. What you're not doing is setting it free so that it can live the life that every single strand of its DNA demands that it should. For years and years after my father's death, I was blindly trying to deal with the symptoms I was experiencing, but never gave a thought to addressing their cause. I felt grief and anger, and those emotions governed so much of my behaviour. That's why I spent so much time getting drunk out of my skull or scrapping with idiots. It was only once I started really grappling with my demons that I began to really make progress as a man. I'd realised that I'd been like someone adrift on the ocean in a boat with a massive hole in it. But rather than fixing that hole, I'd been using a shitty little tin to try and bail out all the water that was flooding in. Although I was just about managing to keep that little boat from sinking into the depths, it was exhausting, unpleasant work and became even harder the older I got. It was only a matter of time before I went under. I realise that this is delicate, complex territory. Not everybody will recognise their own story in my specific circumstances. Losing my father had a unique effect on me. So even if you've experienced the same trauma, you might have responded to it in a completely different way. But if you're getting fucked up every weekend, if you can't hold down a relationship, if you have days when you find yourself engulfed by rage at everyone and everything, isn't it worth looking at your life to see whether there are underlying reasons that dictate the sorts of choices you make? Is it because you're bored witless by your job? Is it because you feel suffocated by other people's expectations? Are you struggling in secret with your mental health? Don't you owe it to yourself and to those who care for you and rely upon you to find out? Ask yourself, why are you feeling like this? Why do you keep doing the same things? Why do you keep making the same mistakes? Do you know yourself well enough to recognise what's happening and why? The longer you hold off from asking those questions, the longer you're going to stay lost in the void. Because when your focus is on dealing with symptoms rather than causes, you're only going to end up suppressing yourself. You're placing self-imposed limits on your potential. It's like deliberately playing life on the hardest mode possible. Some of the people facing the biggest challenges are ex-military. As I've previously mentioned, readjusting to the messy realities of Civvy Street after years in the rigid, ordered army can be difficult. Many of them now feel no sense of belonging as they no longer have a sense of purpose and achievement. I remember one guy, Mikey, who messaged me a few times. He told me that he'd listened to all my books and they really helped him at some of his lowest moments. But he was getting up to a lot of stupid stuff. He'd tell me things and I'd think, fuck me, you're sailing pretty close to the wind. When I didn't hear from him for a while, I assumed he'd got back on the straight and narrow and everything had settled down for him. The last thing I said was to keep going back to the books. Don't think that you're ever done. The work never stops. And if my books have worked for you, then I'm so pleased and honoured. Then maybe a year after we'd last been in contact, I got a text message from his girlfriend. She told me that he'd been given a life sentence after getting embroiled in a violent altercation. It was a story I'd heard so many times before, but one that never fails to affect me deeply. He's asking how we can get through everything, she said when we spoke on the phone a bit later the same day. What can he do? Tell him I told you to say this, I replied. Tell him you need to hold yourself accountable. You've got to take it on the chin. If you're guilty of the crime you've been sent down for, then you've got to face up to it. Learn from it. Do what you can to make amends. You're not the first person to make a bad mistake. You won't be the last. You're at your lowest point now. Acknowledge that you're going to be in there for 10 years. That it's out of your hands now, there's nothing you can do. But do you know what is in your hands? How you spend those 10 years. Don't let it become dead time. Make every day count. You say you've listened to all my books, and yet you're here. It's like you needed this for them to actually make sense. Because if you'd been actioning it, you wouldn't be looking at a life sentence. Your life has been stripped back to its most simple elements. You don't have to deal with many of the complicated responsibilities that are an inescapable part of life outside your prison's four walls. You know what time you have to get up, what time you'll eat, what time you can leave your cell. There's always going to be a roof over your head and food on the table. There's almost nothing you can do to exert any influence on what happens on the outside. If some road rage prick starts shouting at your girlfriend, what are you going to do? So you could walk out on your exit date having done nothing except watch the clock. Or you could have improved yourself. It's not just that you have lots of time to self-reflect, time to really get to know yourself. There are so many opportunities to gain qualifications. Take each day as it comes. Do something new and positive every 24 hours. It might be reading a book. It might be signing up for a course. It might be doing something that helps you move up through the prison hierarchy. Use everything you can. Don't fall into the trap of planning a life that begins on the day that you're released. Don't pretend that what's happening here and now isn't your real life. Don't pretend that your real existence is waiting ahead of you once this or that has happened. This right now. This is your real life. You should be doing so much that your outlook as it was is completely different to your outlook now. You need to have ambitions and expectations that dwarf whatever you currently want from life. You will never have a better chance to focus on yourself. We still touch base every now and then. I sent him signed copies of my books. We talk about them. We talk about the problems we both face and the progress we have and haven't been able to make. Seize the day. The thing about Mikey is that prison is going to give him a chance to address the things that he struggled with for so long. You don't do the stuff he did if you're not carrying some serious issues around with you on your shoulders. But he has the opportunity to make sure that by the time he gets out, he's a different person with stronger foundations. You don't need to wait to reach your lowest point before you do the same. If you're struggling with your mental health, now is the time to open up and talk to somebody, whether it's a close friend or a therapist. If you're so unchallenged by the job you're in that the only way you can rid yourself of all your excess energy is to cause trouble every Saturday and Sunday, now is the time to think about a change of career. If you're in a relationship that makes you unhappy and leaves you full of self-loathing, now is the time to end it. You have to live with yourself for every second of the time you have left on this earth. Why not do everything you can to make the most of it? Lessons. So many of us find ourselves living lives suppressed by society's expectations. We seek a release from the pressure and frustration we feel in synthetic highs, like drinking and fighting. Why not swap these empty synthetic highs for more progressive natural ones? It wasn't until I faced up to the consequences of my father's death that I really turned my life around. At some point, you'll realise that it's better to confront the causes of your problems rather than desperately trying to treat the symptoms. Do what you need to do to address the issues that lie at the heart of your problems. Honest conversations are always difficult, but they're also the best sort of conversation to have, because you're not wasting anybody's time. You're never going to be able to find the solution to a problem if you're not able to be honest about what it is you're facing up to. Chapter 7. You give up too easily. Nothing can prepare you for the ways in which fame, even in its mildest varieties, can bend the life you had before out of shape. I don't think I was ready for the level of attention I got. Actually, I know I wasn't. Just ask Emily. I still find it strange that people recognise me in the street, and there isn't a book long enough to describe the complicated and often uncomfortable relationship anyone even semi-famous has with the media. I'm not here to complain. My career on television and as an author has brought me brilliant things. And the thing I never expected, the thing that I feel blessed by, is the fact that I've been given a platform that I can use to help others. I don't want to sound like I'm preaching, but I mean this. It's so important to me. I'm really lucky that from time to time, I can make a difference, even in tiny ways, to other people's lives. That makes those occasions when I'm confronted by a story or a situation that I can do nothing about all the harder to bear. There's one guy in particular I'm thinking about. We met while I was signing books in a store near where he was from. I could tell that Jack was a bit of a lost soul, even before he'd opened his mouth. The harsh artificial lights of the shopping centre we were in weren't doing us any favours. But they were especially harsh on his face. They showed how gaunt and pale he was, how thin his hair had got, and seemed to pick out every single line on his face. He seemed almost afraid to be there. He wasn't after advice, not really. What he wanted was consolation. Jack grew up in a provincial town, which he told me he'd hated. He never felt as if he really fitted in with any of the other kids at his school and spent most of his time counting down the days until he could escape. For him, that escape was art school. He thought that once he was among like-minded people, he could leave the drabness and pettiness of his old life behind forever. Even Jack would probably admit that art school was always going to struggle to live up to those expectations. It's unrealistic to see any one thing as a magic ticket. Still, he told me he wasn't prepared for what happened when he arrived there. He discovered that he fucking hated it. He'd gone right through his teenage years thinking that he was creative, the fact that he'd excelled at art forming a big plank of his identity. It was what set him apart from everyone else in his class. Of course, he didn't magically get worse at drawing or photography when he arrived at art school. He just found himself surrounded by other kids who were all as good as him. And some of them were better, quite a lot better. I couldn't cope with that, he told me. I know it sounds stupid, but it sent my head in a spin. It just sort of upended my sense of who I was and what I could offer the world. Jack's confidence took a real knock almost immediately and never really recovered. Still, he did his best. I reckon I was the only one on my course who went to every lecture, every seminar, he said ruefully. And I threw everything I had at my end-of-year project. But he only just scraped a pass. That hit me so hard. It confirmed all the doubts I'd been haunted by over the last months. I just thought to myself, I'm not good enough. What am I even doing here? The tipping point came when one of his tutors tried to give him some advice about how he could improve the following year. I don't know why I reacted so badly, but I did. Hurt pride, I guess. I just told him to fuck off and stormed out. Apart from coming back to my halls during the summer to pick up all my stuff from my room, that was the last time I set foot in that art school, or any art school, although I didn't know that at the time. Jack went back to live with his parents. He thought it would be a temporary arrangement. Initially, he told himself that he would go back to art school, that it wasn't too late to try again. He started doing some casual work in a factory. Then years went past, almost without him noticing, and one day he realised that it was too late. He wasn't ever going to go back to art school, and worse, he was stuck in the town that he thought he'd escaped. I've gone past the point of having regrets now, he said. I've spent ages blaming everyone around me. I was so angry. I couldn't believe that nobody had tried to stop me, although, of course, they did. I just wasn't listening. So I've made my peace with the stupid fucking decision I made, but I'm still struggling to get used to the consequences. Quitting can feel like the easiest thing in the world, but the fact is that most of the time, quitting only offers a temporary release from discomfort. All you're really doing is exchanging a moment's relief for a lifetime's worth of regret. You end up bitter and sad like Jack, because when you look back at your past, you realise that you weren't beaten by circumstances or bad luck or a stronger opponent. You were beaten by yourself. You cannot afford to let yourself become one of those people who start out on their journey full of enthusiasm. And then, as soon as there's even a tiny bump in the road, turn around and go back, telling themselves, well, it wasn't meant to be. You can't afford to convince yourself that unless every single door swings wide open for you, there's no point persisting. You can't afford to not realise that sometimes it's up to you to break those doors down. You can't afford to be like Jack. You're stronger than you think. The things you need to appreciate in those moments when you're overwhelmed by the temptation to throw in the towel is that you've survived 100% of your bad days. How amazing is that? You're so much stronger than you believe. So why are you telling me right now that your life is fucked? You're still here. You're still standing. You've beaten everything that's ever been thrown at you. So why do you think that now is the moment when that perfect record is going to come to an end? Why wouldn't you smash whatever's coming down the road? You've proved that you survived. So why not start living? And how do you start living? By building yourself up. I think it takes us all a while to realise how resilient we are. Sometimes we need to take a step back and appreciate how much we've survived and how much stronger we are as a result. When I was a kid, I thought I was vulnerable. And a lot of the time, I was. But I was actually already a lot tougher than I imagined. I'd kept going right through the time after my father died and we moved to France, even though there were definitely times when all I wanted was to go back to my old life in England. And yet, I ended up loving my time in France. I really thrived. I even joined a local football academy and was thinking about becoming a professional footballer. Then when I hit my mid-teens, I realised that I was desperate to explore more of the world. I'd had all the adventures I could in that pretty quiet corner of Normandy, and it was time to leave. That's what led me to joining the British Army when I was 17. 2 decades on, I still remember what a huge culture shock it was to exchange rural France for the uncompromising environment of the Army's training centre. The soldiers I met couldn't get their heads around how polite and nice I was. When they weren't taking the piss out of my French accent and mannerisms, they were looking at me like I was some strange animal that had just stepped out of a zoo. Jesus, I'd think to myself in a few moments I had to myself. What the hell have I done? Suddenly, my family seemed very far away. Was this the right decision? The excitement and enthusiasm I had about the idea of joining the army melted away and was replaced by a little voice inside my head saying, "You can quit. Just turn around and retrace your footsteps. You can give up. Nobody will mind." I began to feel overwhelmed. There's very little in life as crushing as seeing what you thought was your perfect dream turn into a total nightmare before your eyes. The little voice got bigger. So too did the temptation to quit. I knew I'd be able to slot straight back into the life I'd left behind. Everything that I'd been so sick of just a couple of weeks ago now seemed to shine with promise. I don't know why, but one day I had a sudden flash of memory. I thought back to my first experience of France almost a decade earlier. The searing, almost blinding emotional pain that followed losing my father, and the shock of being snatched out of my happy, comfortable life in Portsmouth. There was the first day at a new school in a new country, with all the kids laughing at me because I was so clearly lost and bewildered. And yet, I managed to survive. And I was even stronger now. I'd coped with all of that shit back then. So why was I so intimidated by what I was facing now? This memory was a game changer for me. I genuinely felt a couple of inches taller. The next time we went out on a run, I was faster than I'd ever been before. All the stuff I was struggling with was put into perspective. Yes, it was hard and uncomfortable, but that's true of so many experiences. The fact that something is difficult isn't a good enough reason to stop doing it. Often I've found the stuff that's most challenging is also the most worth persisting with. That's the approach I try to take right through my life. At those moments when I've been at my lowest ebb, when I hear that whisper telling me, just give up, quit, it will be easier. I take a few seconds to remind myself of how much I am capable of and how much I've already achieved. You can do the same. Next time you're on the verge of quitting something because you think it's too painful, or you worry you're not going to be able to cope, think back to all the tricky things you've already survived. Think back to all the challenges you've seen off. Think back to all the hard times you've endured. It might be that you'll remember a skill you employed that helped you win through. Or it might be that you can draw strength from reminding yourself exactly how resilient, how strong you really are. In some ways, that's the ultimate plot twist. The hero that you look to for inspiration when you're struggling isn't a sports person, a soldier, a great figure from history, or even somebody off the telly. It's you. Until your last breath. I've been asked by people suffering from serious illness how they can maintain hope. I tell them that the only thing I know that even vaguely compares to their situation is combat. My attitude when I was in uniform was always the same. Never end the fight. Keep battling until your last breath. And when that comes, you probably won't know about it. That's how it was. You wouldn't have given up. You wouldn't have ended the fight. The fight will have ended you. If, when I was on tour, I caught one in the head, would I know about it? Would I fuck? That fight, that determination to never let yourself get beat, is a thread that runs through the stories of so many of the most awe-inspiring people I've met. In the military, it was triple amputees, or guys who were shot in the lungs. They believed and they came through it. No matter the odds, they didn't stop believing that they'd win that battle. Or there's the man I know who struggled against cancer for years. Treatment after treatment failed, and then one worked. Never give up, he told me, a big smile on his face. He understood that if you're willing to keep going, even if you feel as if you're just clinging on, then you're giving yourself a chance of winning. It's only when you give up that you know it's all over. In the meantime, every extra breath you take is an opportunity to make progress. Every extra breath is another victory because you're still alive. You're still going. No regrets. I believe in trying to live a life with as few regrets as possible. One of the most straightforward ways of doing this is to make sure that I don't become a man who quits as soon as the going gets tough. Quitting can become a habit. You do it once, and then you find that next time it gets a bit easier. The time after that, it's easier still. Before you know it, you've established a way of life whose parameters are defined by your weaknesses rather than your strength. Every time you give something up, you're adding another regret to the pile. Eventually, the weight of all of those lost opportunities, all of those half-finished plans, all of those abandoned ambitions will begin to crush you. That's certainly what Jack experienced. Is that really what you want too? Fail to prepare, prepare to fail. You have to be prepared for pain. You cannot afford to let it surprise you. If you go into something just telling yourself that it's going to be sweetness and light from beginning to end, then you're denying some of the most basic facts about life. Sometimes bad things do happen. You can't stop that. But you can try to do the sort of mental preparation needed to ensure that when everything goes south, you're not caught completely unawares. Because if you're not mentally ready for the bad times that will inevitably strike, then you're going to be far more vulnerable to the temptation to give up. That's why when I signed up to go on tour, I forced myself to acknowledge that some of my friends probably wouldn't come back. And I reminded myself over and over that there was at least a possibility I might sustain a serious injury. I made sure that this knowledge was programmed into my head. There were guys in the Marines who had that mentality of, it's never going to be me. Well, really? You're not going on a big lad's holiday. You're going to war. You've got to understand what it is you've signed up for. Don't pretend that there won't be consequences just because you can't face up to that reality. And guess what? When we did start to take casualties, it was the men who pretended to themselves that they were off on a sort of heavily armed road trip that really suffered. The reality of the situation hit them so much harder than it would have if they'd taken the time to get their head straight in advance. I find it also helps if you remind yourself that every bit of pain you take now will make you stronger in the long run. In my last book, Mental Fitness, I talked about how you can get across the pain threshold. What I should have said is that what is true for physical suffering is actually just as true for mental suffering. Once you've gone through it, things will get better. The next time you push yourself, you'll experience less pain. Go again, and there will be even less pain. Eventually, you'll be numb to it. Grind it out. People want instant gratification. They want the reward without the work. The problem is, that's not life. Good things don't come from shortcuts or magic tricks. In my world, there's no such thing as a life hack. You have to commit to a process. You have to be in it for the duration. It's entirely possible that the first time you try something new, you'll struggle. You might even fail. That's okay. That's absolutely normal. Do your best to find out what went wrong and what you could do better in the future. Try again. You'll probably get a bit closer this time and you'll learn a bit more. Try again. At some point, you'll get there. That was the big mistake that Jack made. He didn't realise that just because you fail once, it doesn't mean that you'll fail forever. At the beginning of my military career, I really struggled with any exercise that involved putting weight on my back. When I could run unencumbered, I'd always be at the front. But load me up with 30 kg and I'd fall behind everyone. It was so dispiriting, and the worst of it was that it was all unfolding in public. 2 years in, one of the NCOs suggested I should quit. That made something click in my head. Someone telling me I should quit after 2 years of hard effort made me want to succeed even more. And literally, overnight, it all changed. The next time we went out with heavy burgans, I was near the front of the group. So that's why I always say to people, you've just got to keep at it. A lot of people give up at the first, second, or third hurdle. They drop out of the queue and try something else. Then 5 years down the line, they realise they never should have given up and join the back of the queue again. It's all about having the perseverance to stick at something through the good and the bad. Ignore people who complain that it's going to be a long road. What the fuck do they expect? Life is a long road. Most people are on this planet for decades. I'm 41 as I record this. So, If I live until I'm 100, I've got another 60 years. Don't think about time. Don't think about your destination. Think about the next positive step you can take. Do it increment by increment, commitment by commitment. Prove to yourself that you know what perseverance and dedication mean. Graft and graft and graft if you need to. And remember that nothing worth anything comes easily. Look back at your life. You didn't fluke any of the stuff you're proud of. You worked for it. If you didn't put the hours in, you wouldn't value the prize in the same way. My boy Gabriel was disappointed about having been put in the lowest set for maths. But if and when he gets put up to set 2, he's going to feel so much better for having worked his way there than if he'd started out higher up. He'll know he's earned his place. He'll know that he deserves it, and so won't be looking over his shoulder all the time, worrying that he's not good enough. There's probably only 1% of the population who smash whatever they do. Good luck to them. The rest of us have to start somewhere further down the ladder, and some will be right at the bottom. I wouldn't want to start at the top. I wouldn't want to be one of those people who gets dealt all the best hands by life. Because where, realistically, can they go with that? What can they achieve and say to themselves, I built that. I shed blood, sweat and tears, but I built that. Exercise. Make difficulty a feature, not a bug. It's so easy to avoid things that are difficult. In fact, it's so easy that it becomes a habit that's tough to break. It gets to the point where you find yourself in the sort of rut where you never try anything new or challenging because you're always telling yourself, it's too hard, I won't be any good at it. But hard isn't the same as impossible. And there's no shame in finding something difficult. That just means you're stretching yourself. You're becoming a better version of you. More than that, I think it's wrong to assume that difficulty is inherently a negative thing. We forget that we probably found a lot of things we enjoy and take for granted now really tricky and intimidating to begin with. We also forget that the process of working something out that seems challenging can actually be incredibly rewarding. Think how satisfying it is to finally master a tricky skill. You can feel your neurons firing and it leaves you exhilarated. One thing you can try to do is change your relationship with difficulty. Instead of seeking ways to avoid it, why not actually hunt difficulty out? If there's a steep hill on your way home from work that you'd usually cycle around, why not try to cycle up it? It's likely that the first time you give it a go, you'll struggle. You might even have to get off and push your bike after just a few meters. But that doesn't matter. Next time, you'll probably be able to get a bit further, and eventually, after much effort, you'll reach the top in one go. The important thing is that if you come to see your fear of difficulty as a mental block that you can challenge, you'll no longer be dodging stuff because it's a bit awkward. You're growing your world and embracing new experiences. Lessons. When you quit too easily, you're just piling up regrets for the future. Don't let a minute's relief be a prelude to a lifetime's pain. Whenever you find yourself struggling and tempted to give up, use your own past as an inspiration. Remind yourself instead of what you're capable of. Remind yourself how resilient you are, how many problems you've overcome, how many solutions you've come up with. Don't make yourself vulnerable to the temptation to quit by failing to anticipate potential problems. The more you prepare for the possibility of bad things happening, the better you'll be able to respond when they do. If something is hard work, that very often means it's worth persisting with. The achievements we value most, the achievements we are most proud of, are almost always those we've worked hardest for. Nobody has ever been given a gold medal for something that's just fallen into their lap. Don't shy away from difficult or complex things. Not only are they more rewarding once you've completed them, you'll learn so much more from failing at something that challenged you than you ever would from succeeding at something you found piss easy. Chapter 8. You're not setting yourself high enough standards. Maybe there are other lads that have made a more catastrophic first impression in a special military unit than I did. Maybe. But I very much doubt it. The people who were still standing at the end of selection all got a coach down to get badged. I was just about hanging in there, coming to terms with one of the worst hangovers of my life. In fact, I think I was probably still pissed. The night before, we'd been invited into the sergeant's mess. Finally, we could let ourselves go after months of being pushed to our limits. The alcohol, and there had been a lot of it, had ripped through our tired, elated bodies. I was giddy halfway through my first pint. It would have been a memorable evening, except I wasn't sure I could recall much of it. It would have been a memorable evening, except I wasn't sure I could recall much of it. We all got off the coach at the barracks. What we were supposed to do next was catch another coach that would take us to the place where we'd be given our badges. 7 of us managed that simple task. 1 of us didn't. Unfortunately, that was me. We'd been told that we were okay to leave our bags on the first bus. So, I'd done that. But, as we were walking to the next coach, which was on the other side of the camp, someone chirped up to remind us that we needed our berets. Shit, I thought. I've left mine in my bag. I still had my Marines mentality then. This sort of thing felt really important. I wasn't yet that chilled, bearded SF guy cutting about. My mindset was freshly shaven and ramrod straight. I didn't want to be bawled out for my stupidity, so I sprinted back to the coach, retrieved my beret, and then did my best to catch up with the others. But as I ran up and down the camp streets, it became increasingly clear that not only had I lost track of the rest of the guys, I'd also had very little idea of where I needed to get to if I wanted to catch the coach that was due to leave any minute. I glanced down at my watch. Fuck. My face reddened. I could feel sweat trickling down my back and my heart bouncing around in my chest. The panic seemed to make my hangover symptoms even more severe. My mouth was dry, my stomach churned, and it seemed as if a blacksmith had taken up residence in my brain. Fuck. It was becoming increasingly hard to think clearly. My mind was a blur of featureless accommodation blocks. Up the main straight, I tried another couple of avenues, but got the same result. Jesus, had I just run past the naffy again? Where was I? I was sure that the coach would have left by now. I couldn't believe what was happening. I made my way through the dense, unmappable jungles. I'd hiked through the Brecon Beacons, navigating through the worst weather that the mountains could throw at me. And now I'd got lost in a fucking camp. An unpleasant series of self-recriminations began to cycle through my mind. Why did I go out last night? Why didn't I spend more time sorting out my kit? What had I done? Suddenly, I had the horrible realization that my future in the special military unit might be hanging in the balance. We'd just been through an unforgiving, brutally unsentimental process. One officer was failed on the very last day. He'd had to walk past as the rest of us were shaping our berets. I began to worry that my fuck-up was going to give people a reason to change their mind about me. Was I going to have to watch other people being badged, while I was condemned to slink back to my unit with my tail between my legs? 5 minutes passed, then 10, then 20. It was just as I was about to give in to temptation to find a nice cool corner of the base and crawl into it, that a guy dressed casually in a t-shirt, jeans and hiking boots stopped me. "All right, mate, you look a bit lost. Can I help?" I took in his long hair, sideburns, and the easy, relaxed way he held himself. I knew straight away that he was a special military unit operator. Trying to keep my voice level, even as panic was bouncing around every cell of my body, I explained that I'd just passed selection and was trying to find the coach that was supposed to take me off to my badging ceremony. To my relief, he seemed to know what I was talking about. "You guys are going down to get your berets?" "Yes." We were walking side by side at a slouchy pace. Inside, I was screaming, "Run, run, run." "Were you out last night?" I gave him a bleary look. He began to look amused. "The coach left 10 minutes ago." My heart sank. My first day at the squadron. Oh my God. He smiled. "You better get down there." "It's my first time here. I don't know where anything is." The smile was still there. "I'll drive you." Without much ceremony and without going any faster, we strolled down and he grabbed a vehicle. "Jump in." "Thanks, Staff." As I settled myself in the seat, he held his hand out to me. "Gaz, not Staff. What are you, ex-Marine?" "Yeah, but I was in the engineers before that." "Ex-engineer? You're coming to my squadron." It seemed to be getting worse. It wasn't just that I'd made myself look a numpty in front of another special military unit soldier. He was someone I was actually going to be serving under. Then casually he said, "We're going out in 2 weeks." While I was taking this in, he spoke again. "What's your name?" "Middleton." "Middleton? You're with me. You finished right at the top of your selection group, didn't you?" He squinted at me, as if he didn't quite believe what he'd just said. And who can blame him? What must this guy think of me? He never stopped being friendly, but I could see that part of him was wondering, who is this liability? How did he slip through the net? My thoughts began to spiral. I kept trying to remind myself that not only had I passed selection, I'd been one of the best performers in my cohort. And yet, here I was, getting lost in the barracks. Maybe I'd just got lucky. Did I really deserve to be here? 20 minutes later, he'd caught up with the coach and I was back on track. Once the ceremony started, one thing became very clear. I never actually needed my beret. Normally, when you pass selection, you get a couple of months off because your body and mind need a chance to heal. But, as Gaz had warned me, 14 days later, I was doing pre-deployment training. No matter what they think of me now, I told myself, I'm going to show them on the ground. I set myself the highest standards I could and worked like a demon to meet them. As a result, I smashed it, absolutely flying through that training phase. I was so quick, so skillful. When I came out the other side, I'd been appointed point man, a role that's usually only given to people with far more experience under their belt. Going out so quickly was the best thing that could have happened to me. It was the chance to show them I wasn't the goof that my fuck-up might have suggested I was. Nobody ever mentioned what had happened back in Poole, or suggested that it had changed their opinion of me, although the fear that they might do so remained there in my head. I didn't want to give the Special Military Unit any indication at all that their new recruit wasn't up to the job. I didn't want to look back and think, phew, I got lucky here. I wanted to be able to stare in the mirror and know that I'd earned my place. What I also understood was there was no question of lowering my standards once I got my feet under the table. Throughout all the years I served, I never let up, not once. And I've carried exactly the same attitude into my life beyond the military. Because I know that if you ever let yourself get complacent, if you approach everything with a will this do attitude, then you're guaranteeing that at some point sooner or later you'll find yourself trapped behind the wall. You don't need to be an elite soldier to possess an elite soldier's mentality. Whatever you're involved in, you should be demanding as much of yourself as you possibly can. High standards enable you to achieve your goals. They help keep you motivated. They form the bedrock of your growth as an individual. If you don't go into projects or jobs or relationships wanting to excel, why embark on them in the first place? You set the standards. Who sets your standards? There's only one right answer. You. You should never need to be told what standards are expected of you. You should be setting them yourself. When you set your standards high and aim to hit them consistently, then you'll always be kept on your toes. Okay should never be good enough. That's the way that the best athletes approach their sport. Cristiano Ronaldo was born with outrageous talent, and yet it's his unbelievable commitment that stands out. He works and works and works and works. He's relentless in what he asks of himself. He knows that there's no progression, no success without struggle. Do you want to look back on your life 20 years on and be cursing the fact that you let an opportunity slip through your fingers because you were too complacent, too lazy to make the most of it? I'll keep hammering this point again and again, but honesty is just so important when it comes to setting your standards. You know if you've done well or not. You know when you've made a positive dent in the world. It doesn't matter how other people respond. You have to be content that you have performed to the standards you expect of yourself. If you know in your heart of hearts that you could have done better at a particular job if you'd actually put your back into it, then you need to treat any praise you get as a result of that work as irrelevant. Equally, if you fucked up because you did a sloppy job, you shouldn't be reassured when somebody says, "Don't worry about it. I know you did your best." This attitude is guaranteed to make your standards drop. This slippage might be imperceptible at first, but if you let it go on for long enough, it becomes irreversible. The opposite of the above is just as true. If you put your heart and soul into something, if you know that you've done it to the best of your abilities, and then somebody shows up and dismisses it, don't give their opinion even a moment's attention. What they think in no way whatsoever diminishes the value of your achievement. Complacency is success's deadliest enemy. You should never feel as if you've done enough. You should never tell yourself that you know everything. You should never risk taking time to pat yourself on the back. Because if you do, you'll find yourself sliding backwards and everything you've worked so hard for would have been thrown away. Your standards should never waver or diminish. If anything, the demands you place on yourself should only go one way, up. The more you learn, the more you fail. The more resilient you become, the more you should be capable of. Keep raising the bar. Better than it needs to be. Something one of my book editors once said has really stuck with me. It was in the early stages of putting together First Man In when we were discussing our ambitions for the book. He looked me straight in the eye and said, "I want it to be better than it needs to be." What do you mean? Well, lots of books by people who've got a platform like yours are just contractual exercises. Everyone involved puts the minimal work in, and often that's enough to sell enough copies to get it into the bestseller list and make everyone happy. But I think we can do more, a lot more. I want you to produce a book that's better than it needs to be, because that's what keeps readers coming back for more. That's what makes readers tell their mates about the book. And so that's exactly what we did. We worked our asses off to make something that everyone was really proud to put out into the world. I wanted people who picked it up to realise how important writing books was to me. That was true then, and it's still true now. excellence, day in, day out. I talk to lots of businesses about what they can do to change or improve their culture. Almost always the moment comes when we start talking about professionalism. What does it mean to be a good professional? What can individuals do to become more professional? And how can institutions create environments that encourage and support professional behaviour? People tend to throw a lot of buzzwords and jargon at me when we start that conversation. What the fuck does a synergised implementation strategy even mean? Or they go for big concepts like radical candour or whatever. The upshot of all this is that they're surprised when I start talking about consistency. Because, let's be honest, it's not a very sexy idea. As far as I'm concerned, however, consistency is the foundation of any success. Can you do the basics to a very high standard consistently? It doesn't matter to me if you can occasionally pull it out of the bag if most of the time you fall short. What's important is that you can do it every single day. This is what trips a lot of people up. They can sometimes perform to the standard required, but they can't do it consistently. They don't have the requisite discipline or motivation. The importance of being consistent was rammed down our throats on selection. Ultimately, it was what helped sort out those who were capable of getting through the course from those who weren't. The hill phase gets rid of the dead wood. The guys who are just up there for the kudos or those who simply aren't up to it. You're carrying extreme weights over an extreme distance. The weather's disgusting and the days start earlier than you can imagine. A handful of people make it through. The vast majority don't. After that, you're out for even more training. There is a relentless series of exercises that can come at any time. This is to see how you operate under extreme pressure, when you're also at the limits of your fatigue. The moment you get that single tick indicating you're guilty of an error, you're off the course. During this stage, more and more are cut away, more often than not as a result of errors made by being tired and stressed. It's full on for months. Out of the hundreds of people who started the course I participated in, there were only a handful left at the end. It's all designed to ensure that those who do pass are men that the unit knows it can rely on to perform at a consistently high level, whatever the circumstances. This is what you should be aiming to do. Make every day a good day. Be the sort of person that other people trust because they know that they can always rely on you. And of course, consistency isn't just important in the workplace. You need to be a consistent parent, partner, daughter, or brother. You can't afford to decide to be a great parent only on the days when it suits you. The mistake. I realise I've made selection seem like the most brutal, yet almost most efficient recruitment system in history. Some people did slip through the net, however. For whatever reason, they've been given an opportunity that they didn't quite deserve. Sometimes, when there are concerns about manpower, the CO steps in and allows someone through who in other circumstances would have been bombed out. They get given the benefit of the doubt. We could be unforgiving and harsh in those situations. There'd always be someone who took one of these lads aside and said, "How the fuck did you pass? What are you doing here?" What was really telling, though, was how they responded to that question. Some saw it as a challenge that they needed to rise to. They were desperate to prove that they were worthy of that lucky break. Others crumbled. I've seen people who've been absolutely destroyed by the pressure. It wasn't as if we were in a management team in a mid-sized accounting firm where somebody had fluked into a job. What's the worst thing that's going to happen there? Numbers in the wrong column? In the SBS, you weren't just risking our lives. you were risking your own. I don't want to be dragging your carcass off the battlefield and delivering it to your wife and kids in a box. Mate, do us a favour. Do your family a favour. Do yourself a favour and accept that this isn't for you. But as much as we hated it, those 3 passes enraged the instructors even more. The lads that did well on selection get an arm around their shoulders. Those that didn't, the people who scraped through or get given CO's passes, are given short shrift. I still remember now watching a guy come into the sergeant's mess a couple of steps behind me on the night we were finally invited into their inner sanctum. He was high off the buzz of being admitted to the elite of the elite. That buzz did not last. One of the SAS instructors turned round and saw him. Get out. You shouldn't even be here. Have a drink and then fuck off. He came up to me looking bewildered. Ant, I've been told to get out. He seemed shaken and uncertain, as if he couldn't quite work out if he was the victim of a cruel, practical joke. I could feel something imploring in his voice, like he wanted me to reassure him that there had been a misunderstanding, that everything would be okay. The thing was, I knew he was shit. I knew he didn't deserve to be here. It was a mystery that he made it through the jungle phase. And every mistake he made in the weeks that followed, after a while, we just stopped counting, left us even more mystified. Each time he got picked up on something, I thought to myself, they're going to bin him. And I was fairly sure that's what the instructors had wanted to do. And yet, here he was, about to join the SBS. Just go now, mate. Do yourself a favour. Don't even finish your drink. You're getting badged tomorrow. You'll be fine. He's SAS. You probably won't even see him again. Just do what you've got to do. Pretty much from the day he joined the unit, this guy got called the mistake. That was his challenge. It was up to him to prove to us that we were the ones who'd made the big error. If somebody tells you that you're not good enough or that you're not ready, it's on you to respond. The first step is to be brutally honest with yourself. If what they're saying to you is true, then great, you know what you need to do to the required standard. If you're passionate enough, you'll push yourself and get there. By contrast, if you genuinely think they're wrong, then brilliant. You can show them that they've made a mistake, and you can use everything they've said to you as fuel to motivate yourself. That didn't happen with the mistake. He was a complete clusterfuck. It wasn't just a question of skill, the application and effort weren't there either. It was like he was so deflated by the abuse he got that he struggled to locate his motivation. Or maybe he just thought that the fact that he'd got into the SBS, fluke or not, was enough, and that he didn't have to try any more. Either way, something that he had probably dreamed of for years slipped through his fingers. In the process, he lost the respect of the sort of men whose opinion he valued most. So whatever you do, don't be that guy who drags everybody else down with them. When life hands you an opportunity, work as hard as you possibly can to show the world that you deserve it. Work as if your life depends on it. Don't be complacent. Don't be lazy. Don't live your life on default, hoping that you'll get another lucky roll of the dice. Don't be like the mistake. Ask yourself hard questions. Elon Musk, the world's richest man, has got to where he is by asking really fucking ambitious, uncomfortable, big questions of himself. Sometimes he gets the right answer, sometimes he doesn't. It doesn't matter if you don't become a space rocket building tech billionaire. You can still approach your life in that way. In fact, on one level, you probably already are. At a cellular level, we're asking ourselves difficult questions and providing complex answers all of the time. If you're aware of all the things your body was doing just to keep you upright, let alone what it did to help you cross the room, it would send you absolutely crackers. Your mind would just not be able to cope. Luckily, you don't have to think much about those things, and yet it is absolutely worth asking yourself hard questions. Be bold. Be imaginative. Don't be afraid to creep up to your outer limits of what you think is plausible. Can I really make that business idea work? How would I go about retraining as a therapist? Then it's up to you to try to find solutions. You might find them, you might not. But I know one thing. Whatever the outcome, you'll learn a hell of a lot along the way. You might even have fun. Lessons. The Special Military Unit demand the highest possible standards. I carried that attitude right through my time in the Special Military Unit, and it's still something I insist on to this day. If you don't want to end up trapped behind the wall, you should do the same. Consistency is key. I don't give a fuck if you can turn it on when you feel like it. You have to perform at the same level day after day. You and you alone should be the person setting your standards. You should have absolutely zero interest in performing at a level that satisfies other people. You should be performing at a level that satisfies you. Everything else is irrelevant. Don't ever think that doing just enough is good enough. Don't ever be happy with doing the bare minimum. Make sure that everything you do is better than it needs to be. If you're committed to growing and becoming the best version of yourself, then what's good enough for you today probably won't be good enough in 5 years. Your expectations of yourself should grow as time goes on. Whenever somebody tells you that you're not good enough, you have a choice. You can either shrink into yourself and confirm their first negative impression of you, or you can prove them wrong. Make sure you always take that second option. What better motivation could you ask for?